everyone, how are we doing today? Thank you very much for joining me here. So we will get stuck into some questions at the start of all of this. Kind of house rules, I will do my best to answer everybody's questions. Last time there were just way too many questions and I couldn't get to everyone, and I'm sorry about that. Shout out to Michael, who's helping me today. Try and run through all the questions you give me, because I lose track in the chat really easily. It's kind of intense. So we'll kind of grab a few as we go. And onwards we shall go. So I have some questions here. Dick's questions. Hey, how many customers a day does a cafe need to be sustainable? That is a good question. That is a really tricky question. There's no right answer here because it really depends on your financial model and kind of your rent. Now, we said it was a business one today, right? So I guess let's get stuck into some kind of hardcore businessy stuff. Are we all okay if I just go straight into this sort of thing? You need enough consumers that your rent is really like 10% or less of your net revenue. Right, so if you have a rent or a kind of a rent rates or rent and whatever you pay of $50,000 a year, then you need at least $500,000 of net revenue coming in per year. Now you can divide that down by how many days a week are you open, what's your average ticket, what's your average transaction going to be, and that's going to tell you how many customers you need through the door. But you won't get the same people in every day. I still subscribe to Kevin Kelly's idea that you need 1,000 true fans. Right, and that's whether you're an artist, whether you're a musician, whether you're whatever. Like if you have 1,000 people who think you're great and will come and support whatever you do, you'll be fine. They won't come every day. Like very rarely does a coffee shop have regulars that come every single day. They might come 3-4 times a week, but it's not going to be every single day. So in terms of how many customers you need at least 1,000. How's that? Like you need, I think realistically, you need 1,000 people who see themselves as being, regulars at your cafe. All right. Jonathan Gifford asks a question, which is something no one really talks about, is how to get funding for a coffee shop. Ooh, we're getting into some questions straight away, huh? Okay. How to get funding for a coffee shop. Okay. It depends on what you want to do with the coffee shop. Now, traditionally, coffee shops were pretty low on the returning scale, right? Like coffee shops don't produce enormous amounts of money. So, that narrows down the number of places willing to lend you money or invest money in you. So typically, for years and years and years, banks were the places to get funding for businesses like coffee shops, because they didn't really worry about lower returns. They had their fixed interest rates. They were going to be fine, whatever. Post financial crisis, banks don't really lend anymore. Banks aren't super interested in that. They are deeply unhelpful. So it's meant that people have had to look to alternative sources. Now, there are obviously different types of investors out there that you could go and approach, but if you're going to go and approach someone, then you need to have a pretty good answer of when am I going to get my money back, and how much more money will you give me in that same time frame. You see in the sort of more aggressive VC cycles that an investor would want to put money in and see a substantial return within 3 to 5 years. And a substantial return might be anywhere from 3 to 20 to 100 times the money that they put in at the start. Now, with a coffee shop, 100x return is unlikely. I don't, that's just not real. You can certainly approach people if you have a pretty good idea of how you're going to make money and pay them back. It may be that you intend to grow your coffee shop to be a small number of businesses that you might then sell on to someone else who wants to grow their chain of cafes. I don't really know. Depending where in the world you are, there are other ways and means to raise money. In the UK, there's a number of tax-efficient schemes out there like EIS and SEIS designed to really sort of help you to convince friends and family to invest in businesses, and they get a little tax break in return for investing a small amount in a business like this. But by and large, it's pretty difficult. But it gets a lot easier when you have a lot more financial clarity around, if I'm taking someone's money, how am I going to give that back plus more, plus how much more, right? And the more you can give back, then the less of your company you would have to offer up in return, right? If you can invest £1 million with me, and I can turn that into 10 million, I feel pretty good about giving you a very small percentage of my company. If I'm going to give you back 1.1 million, you're probably going to end up with a lot more of my company because my return is pretty poor. This is an oversimplification, but I don't want to get stuck too long on one particular question. Johnny Hawkins asks, I have capital to invest. Should I do it with coffee? Sure, but no, but yes. It really depends on the opportunity. It depends on your level of risk that you're interested in, your risk-reward kind of ratios. I presume if you're serious about investing, you probably have a good idea of your investment and risk profile. Coffee, I would see as being, unfortunately, relatively high risk, relatively low return. In comparison to tech companies that are able to just massively grow with fixed costs and therefore go from being incredibly unprofitable to being incredibly profitable, coffee shops don't really work that way. All of the costs kind of scale up. So it's a lot harder to invest and expect a very high return. If you're interested in coffee and you want to support businesses or become involved in businesses in an area you're passionate about, for sure, invest in coffee. Okay. Tim Tsai asks, where do you see the balance between customer satisfaction and quality of your own business? At what point you have to determine one particular customer is a single case? Okay, if I'm reading this right, and please clarify if I'm not, it's the sort of the line between at what point do I do what I want to do, right? Serve the coffee I'm super passionate about. And then at what point should I do something that just pleases people, right? And where do I sit on that kind of scale? Is that, Tim, if you're out there, is that about what you're thinking? Assuming that is the case, I think that if you want to do what you're passionate about for a business, then you have to understand that the potential of that business also depends on where you sit on that sliding scale. Now, I think lots of people like really great coffee. I don't think it's, only a small number of people really, really desperately care about it. But, the broader your definition of good, the wider the audience for that. So yeah, if you desperately want to serve, pour overs with no milk, no sugar, like super, exactly something you're very, very, very passionate about, that's totally viable on the condition that you think you can reach and engage with and retain enough people that feel the same way as you. Is that an answer? Am I in the right kind of area? If we're getting too hard, if I need to make these a little less serious, then you just tell me that. To finish Tim's question, you still need to be proud of what you do. You still need to be excited about what you do because customers can tell that. Your staff can tell. Your staff need to be excited about what they do because, again, it's something that people really respond well to. So if you're compromising for money, I think your customers can tell, your staff can tell, and you have the vibe of a compromised business. But I think, there's no need to be exclusive. I'm pro inclusivity. I want to bring as many people in. That's how we flourish and sustain as an industry long term. All right, Andrew, you ask, how do you think differentiation / value proposition of specialty cafes are going to change as good coffee quality becomes more common? This is a good question. This is an interesting question to do with kind of the state of the market right now. So specialty coffee is definitely much more available, and I think that we now have a pretty good understanding that a great cup of coffee alone is not enough to, one, bring a new person through the door the first time, and two, retain that person to turn them into a long-term customer. The proposition has to be more than just one particular product or one category of products, i.e. cups of coffee. Service, I think, is going to be a key part of it. We're seeing already people realize that it's really, really, really hard to build a business of cups of coffee because they're very low cash value transactions that are very labor intensive. And so it's a difficult business to scale. And so increasingly, you're seeing people reject the very pure coffee model, and you're seeing food come more and more and more. You're seeing booze start to appear. Alcohol is part of many people's kind of menu design. So, I think it's, great coffee is going to become one of many pieces that things in good businesses that people worry about. I think, the world is still going to be full of terrible coffee, and that's going to be very available. And if you look at the price of the C market now, low commodity coffee is still unconscionably, disgracefully cheap. And so I think we have to be very conscious that, we're asking a lot more of people in terms of spend per cup than they absolutely have to spend to get a caffeine fix. So delighting them with more than the coffee, with the service, with the environment, with design, with every single aspect of a business that they interact with, I think is key. Krishna asks, what do you personally think is the lowest budget to set up a good cafe? I can't answer that without knowing where in the world you want to set it up and what your aspirations for that are in terms of its revenue and its profitability. However much you think you need, double it. Worst case scenario, you won't have to work 100-hour weeks for less than minimum wage at the start of the business, and you can pay yourself a reasonable wage and not hate yourself and not hate your business, as many owners do in the first 18 months of opening. By and large, people are deeply undercapitalized at the start of their business life. I hold my hand up as someone who has done this. And so you end up with this sort of, buying into the entrepreneurial lie that you're supposed to work 100+ hour weeks, and that's the good thing, where in fact you burn yourself out, you turn yourself against the thing that you were passionate about. And so starting with more money means that, one, you can staff appropriately, and two, you can earn a living salary. And I think those are really, really key in the early days of a business. Taswanto Aji Saputro, and if I get people's names wrong, I'm really sorry. Manual espresso machine or high expensive espresso machine? Are you kind of asking, do you want to go cheap and manual or the fancy latest singing or dancing super expensive thing? It's a good question. Without coming back too much into models and that kind of stuff, I'm pro technology because I think that right now espresso is difficult because it's extremely labor intensive and it's extremely difficult. And cafe owners really have to spend a great deal of the money that comes in on people to make the drinks, right? Like staff costs as a percentage of revenue in specialty coffee shops are currently very, very, very high. I would say in most developed markets, they would sit between 30 and 45% of net revenue, which is an enormous amount of money. And that's because it takes a lot of people to make a lot of espresso drinks. So I'm interested in technology that can reduce the burden on the cafe owner and make an individual member of staff more productive, which means that one individual person could also probably earn more money as a result of being more productive. So that's my kind of answer to that. What if you're in a city where people are used to traditional, badly prepared coffee and espresso, and even after tasting it, say that they do not like third wave specialty coffee? Yet not dead. It's a good question. Kill them with kindness first, I think. You can't tell people that what you have is better, because when you say my coffee is better, it implies that what they drink and what they like is of poor quality, and therefore they have bad taste. And no one responds well to being told they have bad taste. So the kind of nicer way into it is to make them feel welcome, make them enjoy coming and being inside a business, and then being excited about what you like about this coffee. Not to say that it's better than what they like, but that once they trust you a little bit because they like the space, they feel that everything you do is good value, then they're more open to experiences that are outside of their comfort zones. right? Just coming in what becomes kind of a kind of high conflict in a way interaction, which is I've got this great thing, you don't like my great thing because you like terrible things. People respond badly to that, and that's certainly how it went early days in places like London, and why specialty coffee got a reputation as being very pretentious, very unfriendly. Definitely a problem there. So, make friends with them first, and then once you're friends, share a little bit about what you're excited with them, and see if they like it, and ask why, and what they like and what they don't like, and respond to what they like and give them more of that. That's kind of how I think about this. Okay, Carlos Bones asks, what about other coffee businesses, like a subscription of third wave coffee? Is it worth it? I imagine the initial investment is lower than opening a cafe. So are you talking about building a subscription business, a kind of, like I'm trying to think, Misto box, that kind of stuff? This is a difficult model, if this is what you're asking. I'll say that the following things. I'll say the margins are pretty poor, and while your overheads should be relatively low, ultimately, roasters are interested in a direct contact with the consumer, and you don't desperately provide a service. To a roaster, you're a frustration because you get in the way of their relationship with the end customer. If the customer has a relationship with you, then for that roaster, for 1 month, sure, they get a relationship, but it's a different roaster the next month, a different roaster the next month. For that reason, a lot of great roasters have been very hesitant to get involved in those kind of subscription businesses. They would rather have a subscription customer just for themselves. Now, if this is different to what you're asking, I apologize. But I think there are tons of other businesses in coffee outside of cafes and coffee roasting businesses that are worth exploring. There's tons and tons of different services, tons and tons of different opportunities that are poorly met in the coffee industry. Some require a lot of capital to start up with, some require a lot less. But I would start with what you're interested in solving as a problem. What's genuinely interesting to you, really understand that problem, and then go and solve it. The problem with a lot of subscription services is what's the problem that they solve? I'll leave that to people to answer. The truth in many cases is that by and large, most subscription programs solve convenience. They solve, I just need to remember to order coffee. And that's probably not the sexiest or most exciting problem, but that's truthfully one of the bigger problems. Very few people have the problem of, gosh, I wish I could just explore coffee every month in a really fun way. That's a smaller segment there. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying, think about the problem being solved by a business. Okay, Bram de Hoog. Was I close? Would you support a new international coffee agreement to decrease market fluctuations? Ooh, that is a good question. While I'm pro decreasing market fluctuations, it wasn't like it was the healthiest situation with the international coffee agreement before it dissolved. And secondly, I still think that the base model of trade is disgusting and wrong and broken, and I'm decreasingly interested in finding ways to prop it up. I'd rather it broke completely and we found a different way that was just less abusive. I know that's a sort of half answer. If you subscribe to this channel in about a month, there'll be something more along those lines. Okay, Wayne asks, how do I approach pricing for drinks, merch, and retail bags? Very good questions. Are we getting into it? Okay. So I tend to work, costings are based purely on cost of goods. That is everything that goes into the end product and that alone. I don't cost labor into products that way because labor is a fixed cost. And it doesn't scale exactly with the number of products you sell. In an hour, a barista can make 10 drinks, 20 drinks, 40 drinks. I can't realistically cost labor into any product, so I cost only exact cost of goods. Pricing is about a couple of different things. One, it's about hitting target markets. Hitting target numbers, which would be, overall, I would say most cafes need a gross profit margin around 70 something, right? Early 70s would be solid. So understanding your product mix is obviously going to factor into that. You're not going to make that much money on a retail product. You're not going to make that much money on a bag of coffee, but you should make at least that kind of a margin on a drink. I think drinks, in terms of gross margin, need to have a much higher gross margin, upper 70s, early 80s, because there's such a high labor cost attached to them. Does that answer the question? I hope so. Okay. Many questions. The issue of ownership expecting full-time and key employees to sacrifice as much as they do. I've been offered 100% commission. I was told I should expect to sacrifice to work there. Eric, I'm not. I mean, I have a massive issue with tipping, which is unrelated but related. And I just feel like people should be paid a sustainable wage. And if a business doesn't have a healthy financial model to allow it to do that, then it needs to it needs to adjust its model. You know what I mean? Like I don't think that sort of an approach is okay. I'll go with that. Yeah, I think unless the reward is spectacular, you should not be taking on any sort of risk. I don't think that's fair or appropriate. If the reward is stratospheric, like if 100% commission could mean enormous amounts of money, and that was reasonably likely, that's a sort of different story. The risk-reward ratio is a little bit more in line, but I would argue or suspect it's probably not here. Okay. What do you see as the biggest problems facing someone trying to open a coffee business in today's climate? Do I see any new problems or advantages coming down the road in the next 5 years or so? Okay, this is a good question. The biggest problem right now is that there are too many coffee shops in most markets. Now, earlier on we talked about needing, let's say, 1,000 true fans, right? Like needing, a good number of people. Every time a new coffee shop opens, new coffee drinkers don't just magically appear as if from nowhere. They have to either be taken or created. And right now, very few coffee shops are focused on kind of creating new specialty coffee drinkers, and they're typically more focused on sort of trying to steal away, customers from another existing business, and it's much more traditionally competitive. Essentially, instead of trying to grow the pie that we're slicing up, we're just slicing it ever thinner. That's the biggest issue, which is just finding a sustainable audience. Undeniably, the hardest thing right now. It's probably, in London, for example, it has never, ever been a more challenging environment to open a coffee shop ever in history. There's never been more competition. Rents have never been higher. We have absurd economic and financial uncertainty in our future. Let's not go into that too much. You can guess where I stand on that issue. There's huge competition for trained and capable staff members, which means staff costs are very high right now. So it's a very high risk environment, and it's not really a winner takes all one either. Yes, we'll see a bunch of cafes close in the next 3 to 5 years, I think. And after that cycle of contraction, it's probably a better time to open a coffee shop again. But that's it. It doesn't mean you can't open and be successful. But you need to have a very clear idea of exactly who's going to come through your door and why they're going to come through your door and why they're going to change their life, why they're going to change the way that they walk to work every day, which stop they get off the underground of, like which bus they take. All of those decisions may factor into why they visit a particular coffee shop, and you're asking them to change their life. Have you really definitely thought through exactly what your proposition is to them about why they should do that? And a delicious cup of coffee as a warning is not enough, right? There has to be more than that. We've done great coffee and it works for some people, but not enough people. It's a piece, but it's not the whole. Okay. There's tons of great questions here. I'm sorry if I'm talking too fast. William asks, hi James, I was curious about the reasons why Square Mile focused only on a roastery, while most of the roastery I know open up at least a cafe for people to try their beans. Thanks. Okay. William, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, 10 years ago, Square Mile almost opened a cafe. But the global financial crisis happened, and we sort of walked away from opening a cafe. We took a little commercial unit under a railway line, and we started to roast coffee. And I think we had better clarity about what it meant to be a wholesale roaster at that time, and we decided we would try and be the best. If we open a cafe, we'd try and be our own ideal supplier, I guess. That was the sort of thinking at the time. And as we opened, very quickly I worked out that I was maybe a little bit knowledgeable about coffee, but I knew nothing about business. And so I went deep on trying to understand more about the business of business, really. And after several years, I felt that we knew wholesale. We understood wholesale, and we wanted to be better at it, and we wanted to invest more in it. And for us to open a cafe required money we didn't have, or money that we wanted to spend on coffee or on people or on what we were doing. So that's why there was never really a square mile coffee roasters cafe before. At the time, I think we're also very inspired by the model of counterculture, who'd done a very cool thing in the US. Their training labs and sort of spaces in different cities are very cool. I like that a lot. And now Square Mile is involved in a cafe. We're involved with Proof Rock, but that's another story for another day. Okay, Andre. Hey, James. What are your thoughts about the changes we're seeing to make specialty coffee more accessible via single-packed drip bags, capsules, instant? Which format, in your opinion, would win? Well, it was always going to be just a matter of time before people worked out that the high convenience formats sucked because they had low quality product in them, and began to question what would happen if you put higher quality product into them. Now, getting into it here. I'm not sure which format will win. I'm not sure there'll be one distinct winner. And within all of those formats, I don't think there'll be any one dominant player. You've got there's no defense against other players. So right now there's loads of different companies who will start to do instant coffee, right? And that means, let's say Square Mile wants to do it, so we get some instant coffee done, and people really love it. And so what'll happen is, there's a manufacturer out there with capacity, and there's lots of other roasters who see an opportunity in the market now. And so what'll happen is lots of other people will have their coffee made into instant coffee, and there'll suddenly be tons and tons of different specialty instant coffee available in the market. That's what I anticipate to see in the next 2 or 3 years. But no one has a distinct technological advantage over anyone else, and so no one will be a market leader. Nespresso dominates because they owned a patent for 25 years. That gave them a huge, protectable, defensible technology that they could grow with that no one else could touch. And it's only after those 25 years, wherein they are by far the market leader by an enormous quantity, that small players will now come in and start to compete. They've got an enormous head start, a 25-year head start, a multi-billion Swiss franc head start. So I think all the single serve high convenience stuff is interesting and probably good, but I don't think we're going to see one win or one particular company win. Any tips for a roaster getting your beans into cafes? Understand the needs of a cafe and solve their problems. Duffy, I hope that answers that. Sorry, I'm just... Okay. Here in Indonesia, most cafes don't roast their own coffee. They buy from the other roaster instead. What do you think about this? Which is more profitable? Risky? I think your English is just fine, so there's no need to apologize about that. Cafes have a decision to make. Do we buy roasted coffee, or do we roast it ourselves? And there's arguments to be made for both. Buying roasted coffee is much easier. You can outsource problems and other issues to another company. They are fixing a problem for you. Roasting in-house on paper may be cheaper, but I think actually, depending on how you allocate human cost to that project as a whole, as well as any potential capital to start it, I think you need a reasonably high volume to roast your own coffee, and it be notably more profitable than buying from a good specialty roaster. It's a little bit like doing your accounts. It is cheaper to do all your accounting in-house, but it is a giant headache and it's not much fun. And so I am a very big fan of accountants who I pay to do things that I could do, but I really just don't want to. So, you know, I think it depends on why you want to roast. I think in a market with ever increasing numbers of specialty roasters already there, roasting your own coffee is not the market advantage perhaps it was in the past. I'm not sure I see that necessarily in the marketplace. Correct me if I'm wrong in the chat and in the comments there. But yeah, you know, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's nice that, you know, if you roast for yourself and you screw up a batch, that's on you. If a roaster supplies you a batch that's not quite right, you get to send that back and get something else. You know what I mean? Like, there's a level of protection in not being totally vertically integrated. If you feel that you can do a better job than them, yeah, maybe think about it. But it's not, I don't think, quite as simple as you might hope. Okay, a question on blockchain. What are your opinion on these blockchain tech startups aiming to solve issues with coffee supply chain? Is it a silver bullet? Are they going about it the wrong way? Ooh, blockchain. Hey, I'm pro increased transparency, and obviously the idea of a decentralized database and ledger of transactions is the kind of gold standard of transparency. I think that, sadly, there is an extremely low demand for this level of transparency in the coffee industry. I think other industries probably may benefit further from having real transparency of the supply chain that way. And coffee should be a perfect fit, but I think it will be pretty slow to adopt these kind of things because there's essentially still a very low consumer demand for this level of transparency. You might argue that means there's a very high level of trust in the marketplace, or you can be cynical and say there's a very low level of care. Either way, I think blockchain as a technology has great potential. You know, I think a lot about cryptocurrency is nonsense, which is inevitably kind of tied up and connected. But you know, decentralized databases, I think, are interesting. But I think they'll just be slow. They'll just be slow to be adopted in coffee. Sugar Melt asks, James, do you think automation, i.e. roasting, brewing, reduces market value in specialty coffee, given the end quality of the product remains the same or perhaps better? This is a really good question. This is a really interesting question. And I don't actually think we know the answer. The idea that if it's made by a robot is inherently less valuable than if made by a person. To what extent do we value craft? And if we do value craft, does that have a place in the process of getting up in the morning and buying a cup of coffee? I don't think we know. I think the automation certainly provides opportunities, and we can choose to take those opportunities to spend more time on doing stuff that's maybe more interesting than prepping a basket of ground coffee to put into a coffee machine to extract. You know, I'm not against having a bit more time for either customer interaction or just more efficient, effective workflows to do more, to offer more, to be more productive and more valuable as a team member inside a business like that. I also think that automation can very happily take away some of the very physical, very unpleasant aspects of coffee making. I think tamping is a great example of that, but lots of making coffee is fun and lots of it actually is not. Lots of roasting coffee is not enormous amounts of fun. I think roasting will be a bit slower for a few different reasons, primarily because I think we've got a long way to go in terms of collecting accurate taste data to feed something like a neural net, the kind of machine learning kind of setup. But I think this is a great question. I don't know the answer, but I think we're going to get closer to it in terms of closer to an answer in the next few years. Tracy asks, James, any idea how to compete with a franchising cafe, i.e. Starbucks? They can provide a great environment by huge capital investment. Okay. Tracy, I think the way to compete is to look at what they do well and look at ways that you can do something that they can't do well. So historically, quality has been one way, right? Like to offer a better tasting product has been one way that independents have competed with larger franchise business, big corporate entities. I don't think it's the be-all and end-all of our competitive advantage, but I think it's important to look at a Starbucks and say, where does this fall down? right? Where is this not good? Where can I do better? And that's where you're going to start to build your business model, right? You can do better tasting coffee, more traceable, more honest. You can probably be a bit more, not personal necessarily, but more built around your community, right? The franchise model is a kind of cookie cutter model where everything is kind of the same, and there's advantage to that. It's very familiar, but it's not necessarily crafted around your local community, who I think that you need to understand and respond to. All right, I'm sorry if my answers are getting shorter. I'm just looking at this enormous stack of questions. So I'm going to try and get through as many as I can in the next, I'm going to say 20 minutes. 20 minutes. These are very intense things, these live streams. I don't know how I deal with this. Okay, Kevin asks, which one is better for business? Just a good value coffee or specialty competition standard coffee? It goes back to something I said earlier, which is, you and your team must be excited about what you serve, because your customers will respond to that. Undeniably, you know what I mean? You have to be proud and excited about what you serve. So if you're knowingly compromising, your customers can tell. It doesn't have to be binary in every market. You can do a little bit of both. There can be a spectrum. It doesn't have to just be one thing. And which one do you think you can build long-term relationships with customers with, right? Which one are you going to hook them into just you being the place that supplies them that thing? That's the disadvantage of more commoditized coffee, which is it's kind of available everywhere at any price. In theory, the advantage of specialty is that we do something special, something that is not available anywhere at any price and is a little bit harder to get. So, I've answered both there, but you know which way I lean. I'm obviously all about the good tasting stuff. James, looking to get my first barista job. Any tips? Yes. Yes. Write a good cover letter for each business and mean it. Like, research that cafe, have been to it before if you want to work there. If you apply for a job there, really know where you're going and make sure that in your cover letter it's clear that you understand the mission of that business, the vibe of that business, and that you have clearly been there and understood that you definitely want to work there. Businesses get a lot of applications that feel very like form letters. Like, you sent this application to 20 cafes today, and you didn't make the owner feel special. And I'm sorry that it's the way it is, but making the owner feel special, making the person hiring feel special, is a great way to get your foot in the door for that first interview that you will turn up to no earlier than 5 minutes before. Don't turn up half an hour before. Don't turn up 10 minutes before. 5 minutes before max. Ideally 2 minutes before, and don't be late, but just a little early. Side note, reading Mary Koki White's book, Coffee Life in Japan, she talks about how, cafes flourished in Japan as places to wait before an appointment, to allow you so you go to the cafe, you get there half an hour before your appointment, and you wait there until right before your appointment, and then you go to your appointment exactly on time, right? So there's no awkwardness. Early arrivals are awkward, late arrivals are awkward in a different way. Be on time. And then tell them why you want to work there. Tell them why you want to work in coffee. People are desperate for people who want to work hard, who want to learn, but who understand that a job is an exchange of services for money, right? And while education is part and parcel of this, your job is not to learn. Your job is to delight guests. So if you go to a job interview at a cafe and say, I really want to come here because I want to learn, well, that's like saying I really want to come here because I want to earn lots of money. I want to be given. The flow is this way. And so going and saying I want to give great service, I want to serve amazing coffee, I want to develop as I do that and get better and better at that as I go. That's a very different answer to I want to come here just to learn. So I think a lot of owners have probably been through the experience of people who desperately want to learn and who then learn and leave. And for an owner, that's a terrible investment and that's a painful investment, and they're reluctant to make that again. Okay, James, what do you think about coffee businesses in really small towns like in Siberia? This is a good question. Is it Geographia Cofani? Anyway, ideally, the costs of operating in small towns is much lower, right? Like your rent is lower, your overheads are lower, your kind of costs of doing business are lower to compensate for the lower amount of humans that might live in that area. I think those kind of businesses need to be a slightly broader church, right? You can't be the super hardcore thing because there maybe just aren't enough humans that care about that thing enough. You can do that thing and you can build a business around that, but you can also be a wider church and be a bit more open in terms of what you offer and what brings people in, and really, again, build a business around a community. Understand who's there, what are their needs, what do they want from a space, and you can still make it yours and have it be yours, but I think it needs to be molded around the people that make up your community. They become, stakeholders in your business over time, and so I think it's important to consider them early days. Okay. So there's a couple of questions that are related, which is, who did you learn business from, or was it all trial and error? Any mentors or books we should be looking at, from Eli Nat. And Yet Not Dead asks, what resources would you recommend for someone wanting to learn more about business, both on a macro scale markets and a micro scale cash flow, etc.? Ooh, dear. So, okay. I definitely read a lot of business books. I have like a shameful shelf in my house of, because you don't feel good about buying them. They're all slightly, there's some good ones out there. The E-Myth, I think the E-Myth Revisited, I think is an absolutely essential book for the coffee industry to read. I won't give it away, but if you are passionate about coffee and you are a barista who's thinking about their own cafe, read the E-Myth Revisited. Please, absolutely read it. So I read like, I went through all the stuff. There's like a couple of websites that do like, these are the books. This is what you'd learn through a Harvard MBA, but in book form. And there's like 50 books that you would read, and I read a bunch of those. I will at some point put together a kind of business reading list. I've read all the the sort of the stuff that now makes me feel gross, like Peter Thiel's book. What is it, 0 to 1? He's gross, but there's some good ideas in there. I was kind of bummed out when I started because it felt like every blog talking about business was talking about tech, and no one really talked about bricks and mortar. And I still feel that's kind of true today. It's really hard to really to read a lot about building a great bricks and mortar business, which I think is a terrible shame. And they're going out of fashion at a staggering rate. But broadly speaking, just read as much as you possibly can. I was very lucky, which is my stepfather is the classic old school boomer generation entrepreneur. Started his first business at 17, selling fruit and veg out of a van in the sort of remote countryside in the northwest of England, and he built up a little business empire. And he's entirely self-taught. He has no qualifications. He dropped out of school early. And he learned it the hard way through 30 or 40 years of graft. And he was great as someone who pushed me to, read my management accounts and, produce management accounts, understand my P&L, read a balance sheet. And so now I spend a lot of time thinking about those kind of things and thinking about financial models. It helps me read other people's businesses and read their kind of, P&Ls and that kind of stuff. Loads of obviously publicly traded companies, that stuff's all online. Go and look at Starbucks' P&L. Go and look at what they spend on people. Go and look at what they spend on locations and all that kind of stuff. There's a pretty good resource of information in the public domain around existing financial models of coffee businesses. And bear in mind, Starbucks, this is a great lesson for me. Loads of businesses in the early days of London would be like, I'm going to be like Starbucks, and I'm going to be better than Starbucks, but like 10, 20p more expensive, just like a little bit more expensive, just so people who would buy Starbucks would buy from me. And you're like, you're insane. Because Starbucks' costs are going to be half of yours, half, maybe lower, right? Like Starbucks can go cheap because Starbucks' entire model, God bless, sadly late stage capitalism, but they can make a ton of money and they don't have to charge a lot of money, and they're still doing 20% EBITDA, right? Like they're still a very, very, very healthy business most of the time. But yes, join organizations like the SCA, talk to other business owners, right? Like a great resource is other humans. If you're willing to share some truth about yourself, then people are willing to share back by and large, and you get to have some very open, honest conversations. But running a business is extremely lonely. No one will tell you how much money to make. No one will tell you if you made enough or if you should make a little bit more. Like accountants will sort of be vaguely helpful, but no one will be like, oh, you run this coffee shop, this is how much money you should make. And you could argue that's a philosophical question. But then there's also the realistically what's actually possible in a market, in a shop like this, which is a secondary thing. So I will try and put together a post soon, either on YouTube or on my blog or on both, with like a top 10 or 20 business books that I have enjoyed. Okay. Andrew asks, do you worry that the foreign names of coffee drinks, i.e. cappuccino, americano, macchiato, are intimidating to someone getting into coffee? Perhaps more simple names would encourage more to try. Yes and no. I think a lot of those words, a lot of those Italian words have become extremely normalized now. I definitely think that when we sell coffee by the name of the farm, that can be deeply intimidating, right? If you've got like a coffee on from Kenya and you're hoping that the customer will step up and say, hi, I would like a cup of the Kiawa Maruru AA, please. That is intimidating to say. Like, that's definitely challenging. We put up words in a variety of different languages with no pronunciation guides because we feel it's the transparent thing to do. But I think that is definitely intimidating. At Proofrock, obviously the historic like 4 ounce, 6 ounce, 8 ounce thing was like same amount of coffee, varying amount of milk. But ultimately, most people still come and order a cappuccino, a flat white, or what they kind of know. So I think those names aren't really an issue, but I would say coffee farm names can be an issue and are worth thinking about, when you're putting them on menu boards or encouraging customers to try and say those words to order a drink at 6:30 in the morning when they haven't had coffee yet. Okay. Mobile van cafe businesses, any advice? I'll give you one piece of advice, which is key, which I've learned from supplying some coffee businesses in vans that failed. Be in the same place at the same time every day. That sounds really stupid, but if you're thinking, I'm going to do like Monday, Tuesday at this place, Wednesday at this place, Thursday, Friday at this place, no, it doesn't work. People don't want to have to work out what day of the week it is in order to go and get a coffee somewhere, right? They want to trust you, so when they don't have a coffee at home or they don't have coffee at their usual spot and they come to you, that you will be there and they don't have to go, oh, is it Tuesday or Wednesday they're here? I can't remember. You'll just lose them, right? Like the key to those kind of outdoor businesses is to turn up every single day. You have to turn up when it's raining. You have to turn up when it's snowing. You have to turn up when it's way too hot. You just have to be there every single time you said you would. And if you miss that, you lose people straight away, and you lose them forever because they just don't trust you anymore. They're not willing to gamble on getting a cup of coffee anymore. So that's my advice for mobile businesses. Okay, the Grand Mug. Saw this on Reddit yesterday. During a morning rush at a specialty cafe, is keeping the line as short as possible a higher priority than seemingly superficial things than latte art? Who was talking about this? Someone was talking to me about this. There's like an optimal queue length, if you want to get into this. No queue is bad. A long queue is bad. And in the middle, actually, there's an optimal queue length, but that's not really the thing. By and large, first thing in the morning, speed is so important. That's why loads of people don't go to specialty coffee shops. That's why loads of people still go to Starbucks, still go to Pret a Manger, still go to Costa Coffee, still go to Dunkin' Donuts, still go to places that do very mediocre coffee pretty quickly. So, I don't desperately care about latte art. I want nicely textured milk. If they can pour a simple rosetta, that is more beautiful to me than some nonsense, terrible swan. There's a rant about latte art that I want to get into that I'm not going to get into, but whoa. So yes, the line is more important, right? The line is the time of multiple people, right? I'm not wasting 1 minute of one person's time. I'm wasting 1 minute of 10 people's time. That's unconscionable. I have to go quickly. I have to look after the needs of the many. So, yeah. Dick Harbert asks, what is considered good return on investment for a coffee shop? Expressed as what? As in you've invested and you want money back each year? Or are you looking at like an EBITDA profitability kind of thing? These days in a competitive market, if your EBITDA is double digits, you're doing okay. It's not great, but you're doing okay. If you're in the 10 to 12%, 12 and up as kind of, there shouldn't be an enormous gap in a cafe between EBITDA and pre-tax net. But yeah, sort of, I don't think there's a ton of cafes doing in excess of 15% EBITDA right now. So that 10 to 15 area is roughly where I'd say most coffee shops are that are sort of doing okay. This is why historically coffee shops scaled, right? Like if you have one coffee shop doing $500,000 and it turns out 10%, that's 50,000, which by the time you pay tax on it and spend a bit of money on the cafe, that's not a good return. But if you have a chain of 10 cafes, well, that's more like it. You can definitely get out of bed for that kind of money. But scaling cafes became a lot more difficult post-financial crisis with less access to capital, which was something we talked about right at the start of the stream. Okay, Alex asks, I live in a city that is not huge into the specialty coffees and there's lots of dark roasts. Is this a good environment for a specialty coffee shop? I would say yes, because I look at that and I think, hey, no one's selling specialty. I have no competition. Now you can look at a market and say no one's drinking specialty, but I would say no one's selling specialty. That's how London was when Square Mile started. No one really, outside of like a couple of roasters, Monmouth and Union were there, Clemson's were early days there, but by and large, in a city of 8 to 12 million people, no one drank good coffee. And to us, that was just great news. That was just full of potential. So I would feel the same way. I kind of say over and over again, understand your audience, understand your market. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to try and fly through a few more right now. So if you're coming in at the end of this and I haven't answered your question, I'm really sorry. I'll do my best. I had meant to say if you want to super chat a question, I'll definitely answer it. But you don't have to do that. That's okay. Okay. So here we are. Okay. What is the best piece of advice you could give a new micro roaster to survive the coming purge of an oversupplied market? Manage your credit, manage your debt, have as little, manage your cash flow. Be very careful who you lend money to in the form of credit. Consider how many days of turnover you have out as credit, how many debtor days you have out, reduce that number. Ultimately, it's going to be about cash in the short term, or just cash flow. Dick asks, will this live stream be available later? Yes, it will. Amelia, in how many years do you think we'll have the tech to replace expensive manual labor with automated, good coffee making machines? Well, we're not far away. Eversys are definitely doing interesting stuff. I've seen actually a bunch of manufacturers now do pretty solid bean to cup machines. I think we're still several years away from real reliability and scale and volume and that kind of stuff. One thing that was asked earlier on, I don't think we know yet about market sentiment. I don't think we yet know how much it matters to consumers how their coffee gets made. You can see Starbucks' phenomenal growth through super automatic machinery to suggest that people don't care and they just want a nice cup of coffee or a cup of coffee that they know and understand quickly and at a nice price point. But for specialty, I just don't know yet how consumer sentiment fits in with more automation, or certainly so much automation that it's a sort of black box affair where it's someone pushing a button and doing what someone else could do if they walked up to the machine and did it. Vincher asks, with coffee being such a physical hands-on product, do you see more potential in coffee-related online businesses? Digital content creating, online sales, articles online. Goodness me, it's hard to make money doing that. Bluntly, I think there's a large audience there, but they're an audience who are defined by their fondness for a physical product, not a digital one. So I would say it's a very tough place to make money. Okay, Benjamin asked, any advice for someone who'd want to start up a little pop-up cafe cart for events markets? Hopefully you caught my advice on be there every time you said you'd be there. Be there, be consistently there regardless. Doesn't matter on weather, doesn't matter on anything else. Any advice on batch brew for filter? Any model I recommend? I like some of the Fetco brewers. I like some of the Marco brewers. I like some of the Bun brewers. Who's going to give you good support, the necessary training that you need to operate it well, and support you need should it break down. and where does price fit? It's there's a lot of people building nice kit out there. Usually it's a more complex decision into like which one should I buy. Jack asks, any thoughts of supermarkets and specialty coffee? You're going to see more and more specialty in supermarkets as roasters look for growth anywhere. Obviously, we've had specialty in the UK for a little while. In the US, Whole Foods has traditionally carried a lot of specialty coffee. It's going to be painful for roasters because selling to supermarkets is generally long on credit terms and low on margin. So it's not super interesting to me. And I think perhaps we may see more specialty into online supermarkets rather than physical supermarkets. Certainly as businesses like Ocado and others grow. Stephen Seward asks, hey James, trying to open a specialty shop that roasts its own coffee. What do you think of selling coffee supplies in an online store to gain capital for a good roaster? Or is a small batch roaster more than enough? What should I set in place before getting a roaster? Okay, I get the feeling that we're talking very, very, very small scale here. First and foremost, if your business is going to be roasting substantial quantities, then just raise enough money. Raising money through selling tiny amounts is going to be extremely slow and will spend a great deal of your energy, right? Which you don't want to spend yet. You want to spend that on really making the main business fire up and go. So I would definitely look at raising enough money or collecting enough money. Another way to afford what you want to start with. What should you have set in place before getting a roaster? You should know that roaster. You should have roasted on that roaster a bunch. You should have all the tech requirements for installation from the manufacturer or supplier in your area. Take some roasting classes for sure. Make sure you know how to put out a fire when a fire happens. Like, go through all of the boring stuff there, and then have thought about your workflow. Thought about wastage. What are you going to do? How are you going to minimize wastage? All of those kind of things. Yep. Okay. Auto Exec asks, do I think high-end gear like an EK43 attracts customers, or are they purely just for the quality of coffee? I think very, very, very few consumers know or care about the equipment that we use. Industry cares, but industry make for terrible customers because they're not loyal. They're not going to come every time. They're not going to become regulars. They're going to pick the coffee to pieces, and half the time they're going to expect it for free. So definitely don't chase industry as customers. But I think equipment should be there to meet a practical need in terms of how does this help me make great drinks efficiently, without waste, without compromise. And that's the kit you should buy. Okay. Renato asks, how do you think it would be a better approach for a very traditional market like Portugal, where customers ask for the coffee they are used to drinking for like 60 euro cents? I think this is definitely difficult, and it's interesting to watch, some of the early movers in other markets like Spain or like Italy who are trying to do specialty now. I think they understand that filter coffee's been useful because people don't have a set of expectations around price the same way they do around a kind of espresso-y thing. And secondly, environment is very good at breaking down people's expectations of price. It's the truth. And the masters of this have always been hotel lobbies, 5-star hotel lobbies. Somehow convince people that spending €8 on a coffee is perfectly normal because you're in a beautiful hotel lobby. And people do. So while this is an extreme abuse of that, and it's usually terrible coffee, the environment that people walk into will set their expectations. If it looks like a neighborhood bar where they usually spend 60 cents, they'll expect to spend 60 cents. If it looks like something else, if it's still approachable and friendly, but it looks like something else, then I think you get a chance to work with a fresh set of expectations. Can you give examples of specialty cafe setup for fast-paced crowd in a busy district of a big city? Most customers here prefer large-sized drinks and they want them fast. Luis Gongora, I don't know where you are. I think Australia definitely is a pretty good market for this. You can see some super high-volume businesses in Sydney and Melbourne that don't do big drinks that are very, very, very high volume. Places like Patricia and Melbourne were always interesting. That they were so busy they had a 3-group but 4 portafilters, and the 4th was being loaded, tamped, and prepped so that by the time that one group was empty, that empty portafilter would be passed across, fresh one goes in, and on. Yes, I think people do want large drinks and they want them quickly, but I think that there's opportunity to set a different sort of expectation. If you look exactly like we just talked about this, if you look like the place that sells what they always buy, they'll expect to buy what they always buy there, and you'll have a point of frustration because it's a bit like walking into a shoe shop to buy shoes and being told they don't sell shoes, and you'd feel kind of stupid at that point, right? You'd be like, but you look like a shoe shop. But for most people who walk into most cafes and they want to order a big drink and they're told we don't sell big drinks, that's very confusing because they look like a cafe that sells big drinks. So I think expectations is a key part of that. Doug Fry asks, I love my local roasters, but would like to understand the process better. Do you have any recommended books or sites? Do you have thoughts on the various home coffee roasters like the Akawa? Recommended books, there's not many out there. Pretty much all of the roasting books that are out there, Scott's book, Rob's book, just buy them, read them, understand them. Some of the older texts are hard to find and expensive. Don't buy those. Don't buy anything written before 2000. Before 2010, probably, because it's just about something else. Do I have thoughts on Ikawa? I only see Ikawa as being a commercial roaster. It's £3,000. It's not. I think it's not cheap, so I don't see it necessarily as a home roaster. I think their tech is so interesting and kind of game changing in many ways. I'm a big fan of what they're doing. But yeah, Ikawas are very cool, and if you can afford one, then it lets you have a window into what professionals around the world are doing, and that's interesting. You can download a profile from Tim Wendelberg. You can download a profile from Bureau in Melbourne, and you can start to roast the way that pros roast, and that is interesting. But it's obviously only applicable to the particular roast technology of an Ikawa. Okay, E. Trento asks, what's easier, opening shop in a town with an established but perhaps oversaturated specialty coffee scene, or opening somewhere that has not yet developed a taste for this sector? Hopefully you caught what I said earlier on. Definitely the latter. You've got no competition. You can really craft your narrative, craft your story, and grow that market in a way that benefits you. Tiago asks, do you think specialty coffee traders are consolidating? Is it a threat to the coffee industry? They're definitely consolidating. I'm seeing a little bit, not a huge amount, but they were already pretty consolidated to start with, like Ecom and others. There's some very large conglomerates of traders to begin with. There's more traders now than ever before, but I think there are some who probably will have a bad day at some point with a customer or two going under and then just not having the cash flow to survive that, which, the big traders just have enormous credit lines and will struggle through and survive. Okay. Mr. A. McCoy, perhaps. Any opportunity to focus on blends rather than single origin? Okay, I'm being facetious. The differentiation between big chains and specialties is extreme. When do you think we'll come back to blends? We're coming back to blends. You probably, if you're a coffee interested person, geek like me, you might have seen Tony Konechny's new business, Yes Please, who do just a blend called The Mix. Tony, an alum of Victrola, initially in Seattle, then Intelligentsia, and then Tonks Coffee, which sold to Blue Bottle, and then now this is his new thing, which is Yes Please. And I think it's everything's a pendulum. And we swang from blends to single origins, and we're swinging slowly back to blends again. We're going to see more blends, no doubt. And I'm not entirely against that. But there's cynical blending, and then there's, genuine, passionate, tasteful, thoughtful, aesthetic blending of coffees, which is still relatively rare. Andre asks, any trends, predictions for the second half of 2018 that existing businesses should be aware of? They may not have a direct impact on existing coffee businesses, but may pave the way for 2019. Damn, that's a good question. That is a great question. Let me come back to that, because I don't know if I've got a good answer for you. I feel like there should be a good answer, but I don't know what it is. Okay, almost 3 years ago, I started a roastery with little capital, loosely following the lean startup model. Should one have worked with an existing roastery first? Can one still be successful without? I didn't work at a roastery before Square Mile. I wish I had, and I was lucky that I was part of a wider community internationally that let me come and snoop around their roasteries to just work out where they put things. Like, at what point do you pack this? What point does it go on the shelf? Where do you put the vacuum cleaner for just keeping stuff clean? How do you do compressed air for these things here? And, all of the boring stuff that is just painful to work out on your own, and having access to other people's experience and trial and error and results is very useful for sort of getting going. So yeah, you can definitely be successful without having worked on a roastery first, but do try and make friends internationally with people and learn what you can about how they do what they do, how they may be more efficient, effective than you. Yeah. Okay. Figure Filbert. What's your best advice for what to do when retail locations don't want coffee shops in their unit? Finding a location has been by far the most difficult task and full of rejection. That's interesting. I really don't know where in the world you are. And I think so I definitely went through this, but this was in 2007, 2008, where independent coffee shops were seen as being incredibly high risk, right? For good reason, and so I think having covenant is a word I don't want to get into too much, but yeah, I think essentially you need to prove why you're not a risk to those kind of difficult landlords, and if you can't answer that, then I'm afraid you are going to keep getting pushed back. There do seem to still be building developers who are trying to build residential blocks who want coffee shops in the bottom. But again, they will prefer people with some track record, some history. It is not fair. I can't pretend that it's fair. It's deeply unfair. It's one-sided and it's stupid. We are at a point where I think independent businesses are seen as being less risky, but they need some capital behind them. They need to be seen as a safer bet. And so, in your propositions to landlords, I think you need to have a great explanation of like why you're not a risk to them. I wish I had a better answer for that. All right, so I'm gonna answer maybe one more here. Sebastian asks, can partnering with a beer microbrewery for space be a good idea? Coffee in the morning and beer in the afternoon and night. They already have a crowd looking for specialty beer. It's easy to move to. Okay, so I assume we're talking about a cafe here, not a roastery. It's a good question, actually. I haven't seen a ton of shared spaces this way. I don't know how splitting of rent works and that kind of stuff, splitting of overheads and services and electricity and blah, 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 blah. But if that could be worked out, that's a very good question. I think, bluntly, the smell of last night's beer is not conducive to this morning's coffee drinking. I think that's definitely a challenge in environment where bars don't smell good first thing in the morning. They just don't. You're adding a lot of work there that I think is maybe tricky. So yeah, I'd be hesitant. I'd really want to control and own the space and make sure that it was all about what I was doing. We talked about expectations a bunch here. So I think having a shared space of two different brands, different ideas, two different businesses, I think that's tricky. I think it can be done, but I think it's easier for you, a coffee shop, to do your thing and build beer into what you do rather than become a different business in the evening. That's my gut. I don't know this for sure. I haven't seen a lot of it. I think there would be some challenges there, though. Okay, we're going to wrap it up in a second because I've been talking now for like an hour and something. Oh, okay. Tanner asks, what must the focus be of small shops that cannot keep up with well-funded shops? You've got to know your audience better than them. You've got to build a community better than them. You've got to have enough of an aesthetic. You've got to have enough personality in your business that people become emotionally attached to it, right? Like the bigger the business, by and large, the harder it is to become emotionally attached to that as a coffee shop. Like the one coffee shop that I've had a deep emotional relationship with in my life was a London shop called The Taste of Bitter Love. It was a tiny cafe. It was amazing. Coffee and food were great, but it just had so much personality that I felt attached to it like a friend. And I love the people that run it, but the space itself was just somewhere I got attached to. And I think that is a pretty good answer to that question. And just to wrap us up, and I'm sorry if I haven't answered your question, and please do come and join me for another live stream soon. Corey asks, "Sup James, how do you feel about charging extra for takeaway cups? Do you feel there should be an extra charge for takeaway single-use cups or a discount for providing a reusable cup?" I don't think we know for sure what the right answer to this in terms of consumer uptake is. You know, if the goal here is to reduce our use of single-use cups, that's one thing. If our goal is to make more money, that's a different thing, right? And so the answer to the question will depend on really what you want to get out of it. I think charging for single-use cups is such a new precedent that there will be some pushback. And the reason I think the supermarket bag charge worked, where they suddenly had to pay a little bit for a plastic bag, was that it happened to every single supermarket at once. I think the moment you start doing it as just you and not everyone else, it'll be much harder because you're the outlier and no one else charges me for a paper cup. That didn't happen with the sort of supermarket charge. Again, you could argue that providing a discount is reasonable, but do I get the same discount if I bring a dirty cup as a clean cup? Is that fair on your baristas, on your team, on your staff? It is a project that I am working on with Proofrock, which we may have something to share in the future about how we're approaching this problem. But for now, I think that's going to be. I think that's going to be it. I think I'm going to stop talking. I think that is the stream for today. So thank you everyone who came and watched and hung out. This was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed it. I really appreciate you coming, asking me questions, and I hope to see you in a future stream. Please do make sure you're subscribed because I've got some stuff coming this week, some silly things and some very serious things in the next couple of days. So I hope to see you soon. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day.